Hi everyone, it's Jama Malmy. Thanks for joining me today. I am sharing 2 cards that I made for a blog hop for the February stamp of the month. And so this is the stamp set for the February stamp of the month. It is $5 with any $50 purchase on my Close to My Heart website during February 2019, or you can purchase it for $18.95. So I am sharing 2 cards using colored pencils, and the first I'm stamping, and the first paper I'm stamping on is watercolor, and there's some texture to it, so I added a lot of pressure. I cut some of it out because I was covering the camera most of the time, but I added lots of pressure, and I stamped on top of the foam side of my Versamat. So the back of my Versamat is foam, and so it has some give in it when you stamp, especially with a big stamp, and then especially with the textured paper. Now the second stamp I stamped just onto white cardstock because I am going to be using regular colored pencils on that one, and so I didn't need the watercolor paper. And there are a bunch of extra small flowers and leaf clusters that come on the stamp set, so I stamped them like they were coming out of that main focal image. And also the first one that is on the watercolor paper, I stamped in intense black ink, which is waterproof and Copic friendly, and then the second one I stamped in my favorite archival black ink, which is not Copic friendly or waterproof, but it works for the Prismacolor regular watercolor or regular colored pencils. So this first one is with the watercolor pencils, and these are Close to My Heart's new watercolor pencils, which I really like. They're very bright, vibrantly colored. Now they don't go on as smooth and creamy as regular colored pencils like the Prismacolor pencils, but once you blend them with water, it really is like watercolor pigment. It really just starts blending out. It's so nice. And here in a minute, I'm going to show you with the purple how if you put the tip of the pencil up against the water brush before you put the pencil to the paper, it helps intensify the color and get more of that pigment out. So if it's going on to wet paper, like I realized when I was putting it on the dry paper, the color was more soft and pastel. And then if I put it onto a wet area of the paper or touched it to the water first, that's when it really got vibrant and it shone like watercolor does. So at first I just was playing because I'm not a watercolor artist. I'm not a colored pencil expert or any sort of coloring expert, but I was just playing around. And so here's where I thought, oh, I'm going to put the pencil up to the water first and see how much more pigment you get. It's really vivid. So I was having fun playing around with that. And I did it darker toward the top and then blended it to a lighter color toward the bottom. And then with the flowers, I just colored them lightly with the pencil. I didn't want to go over the whole thing with water first because that would have taken extra time. And so I just went over lightly with the watercolor pencils and then went back over it with the watercolor brush. You could use a regular paintbrush for this and dip it in water if you like. I like the watercolor brush because there's always water in it. And then I took my Copic multi-liner pen and I went around some of the parts of the image that were not really vivid because of stamping onto that textured paper. So I just went over it with that Copic multi-liner, which is waterproof. And then now I'm adding some shimmer with the shimmer brush just on the words. And so that finished off the coloring. And now I am going to adhere it onto my card. Now this is an A6 size card, which is, I forget the exact size, 6.5 by 4 3/4 maybe. And because it was not the same proportion as my stamped image, I offset it over to the right and then added that shimmer trim on the left. And then I'm also going to be adding some of the embellishing floss over top of the shimmer trim. So that's what I'm doing here. I put a little glue on the back, and then I cut several strands of the embellishing thread and just grouped them all together, adhered them to the back, and wrapped them around. And once I finished tying them around, I thought it needed a little bit more, because that stamped image really is the focal point, but I just felt like it needed a little bit something extra. So the embellishing thread and the shimmer trim added a little something, and then I thought that it needed a little bit something else. So I added a little bow of the embellishing thread, and I tied that right around the embellishing thread that was already wrapped around. I wrapped the thread around my fingers just a few times, then and then snipped that so that it was several pieces the same length. And that was kind of a quick way of cutting all of those short little pieces that I needed. And then I stuck a mini glue dot underneath the bow to hold it down and hold it in place, but my head got in the way, so I chopped some of that out. Sorry. I didn't think you wanted to be looking at my head this whole video, and my head got in the way a lot. So sorry that this is kind of choppy, and it's still in the way sometimes, but it's just the way it went this time because I had to get right up close and personal to the project. So I lined it with the extra piece of watercolor paper that I had left over from the full sheet, and then stamped a matching little flower on the inside. And so here is a close-up of that card and the nice soft look that the watercolors give. Now with this other one, I am coloring it with the Prismacolor pencils, which are nice and creamy and blend nicely. And I fast forwarded or skipped the leaves because they were so tiny it was hard to see what I was doing. But basically what I did was I chose a light and a dark of every shade of color I wanted to use, and I used the dark color as a dark spot, I guess, on the coloring. Like I said, I'm not a coloring expert. I don't know the terminology, but I just wanted it to be a little bit two-toned to give it some depth. So like on the flowers, I used the darker color toward the center and then used the lighter color to help blend it out and color the tips in a lighter color. And I liked the depth that added. And so I did that for all of the colors, and I'm skipping a lot of that because you don't need to be staring at me watching or coloring because I'm not great, but I have fun doing it, and that's what's important. So I did erase when I got out of the lines. It doesn't erase completely, but it did lighten it up a little bit. And so I'm just gonna keep coloring this. It took me a while to color this because it is so many small pieces. And then when I got to this banner, I was having trouble actually deciding what color it should be for a while. And then I decided on a light gray. It ended up being a little bit darker than I intended, but that's okay. And I did the sides of the banner darker and then had the inside of the banner lighter, like as the highlight. It did, the grays did kind of smear the red a little bit because I wasn't super careful as I went around the red, but that just goes to show how well these pencils blend. So I was a little bit careful, but if you look closely at my photo, you can see that it did bleed or blend the red outside the lines a little bit. And then I took my same Copic multi-liner and went over the letters in that top banner because I did go over them a little bit with the colored pencils, so I wanted to intensify the black again. and I went over a few other parts of this image in the multi-liner too, and it worked out really well. So if you don't stamp a super solid image the first time you stamp, then don't worry, you can go over it with any black pen that you have if you're not going to be watercoloring or using Copics. So for just using the Prismacolor pencils, you can use any thin black pen that you have, like a journaling pen. It should work. So I'm wrapping up the coloring now, and then I decided to use a shimmer brush on top of the red letters, just to add a little sparkle to those. But I realized that they just sat right on top of the color. They didn't soak into the paper, and so it just easily came off. So I ended up adding some liquid glass, which I accidentally left off camera, but I added some liquid glass on top of the letters to add some shine and dimension. And then I also added some sequins scattered around the card, and I adhered those with liquid glass. So I would love it if you subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this, and I've linked all the products below. If you have any questions at all, please let me know, and I hope you have a great day.